Jake Riley turned off the last light in his barbershop and checked the time on his phone. 9 o'clock. Right on schedule. The rain had been falling since sunset, creating a steady rhythm against the front windows. He could see the empty street outside, slick with water, reflecting the yellow glow of the streetlights. He grabbed his keys from the counter and walked toward the door. That's when he saw the shadow. Something big moved outside just beyond the glass. Jake froze. His hand tightened around the keys. Then came the knock. Not a gentle tap, but heavy thuds that made the door rattle in its frame. Jake's heart pounded. 3 years ago, Earth had joined something called the Galactic Coalition. Aliens were real. They walked among humans now. But here in his neighborhood? He'd only seen them on TV maybe once or twice downtown. Never this close. Never at his shop. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. The creature standing in the rain was massive. Nearly 8 feet tall, maybe more. Rain dripped off scales that covered his arms and neck, gleaming like dark emeralds under the streetlight. His eyes glowed amber like a cat's eyes in headlights, but brighter. More intense. The jacket he wore looked like it had been through hell, torn at the shoulders, barely holding together across his broad chest. His clawed hands hung at his sides, and Jake noticed they were trembling. "I apologize for the intrusion," the creature said. His voice was deep, rumbling like distant thunder. Each word seemed to cost him something. "My name is Veklar. My ship, there was a malfunction. I crashed 2 sectors from here. I have no human currency." He paused and his jaw tightened. "Do you have food you could spare?" Jake looked into those glowing eyes. He'd seen that look before, not on an alien but on people. The look of someone who hated asking for help. Someone whose pride was being crushed under the weight of necessity. Veklar's hands weren't just shaking from cold. They were shaking from shame. "Yeah, hold on," Jake said. He stepped back and gestured for Veklar to come inside, out of the rain. The alien ducked through the doorway, water streaming off his scales onto the shop floor. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, too large for the space, his head nearly touching the ceiling. He kept his arms close to his body, trying to make himself smaller. Jake walked to the back room where he kept his stuff. His dinner sat on the small table, a half-eaten pizza in a greasy box. Pepperoni and extra cheese. He'd been saving it for later, maybe a midnight snack. He grabbed the box and a bottle of water from his mini fridge, then headed back out front. "It's pepperoni," Jake said, holding out the box. "Hope that's okay. It's cold, but it's still good." Veklar stared at the pizza box like it was something precious. His amber eyes moved from the food to Jake's face, then back again. "You, just give this?" His voice cracked slightly. "No trade? No contract?" Jake felt confused. "You're hungry, right?" Veklar didn't move. His whole body had gone rigid. Jake pulled out one of the waiting chairs, the sturdy one that usually held his bigger customers. "Sit down, man. Seriously. You want some water too?" He set the bottle on the small table beside the chair. Slowly, as if he didn't quite believe what was happening, Veklar lowered himself into the chair. The metal creaked under his weight but held. He opened the pizza box with careful, deliberate movements. His clawed fingers, each the size of a wrench, handled the cardboard with surprising gentleness. Jake grabbed his broom and started sweeping up the hair from his last customer. He figured the alien might want some privacy. Some dignity. Everyone deserved that. The shop was quiet except for the rain outside and the soft sound of sweeping. Jake kept his eyes on the floor, giving Veklar space. But he could hear the alien eating, slow, careful bites, like each one meant something. After a few minutes, Veklar spoke. "Why?" His voice was quieter now, less formal. "The Coalition taught us protocols. Every transaction requires exchange. Services rendered must be compensated. Debt must be recorded and balanced." He paused. "Yet you ask nothing of me." Jake stopped sweeping and looked up. "You needed help," he said simply. "That's enough, isn't it?" Their eyes met across the small barber shop. In that moment, something passed between them, something Veklar hadn't felt in a very long time. Something his people had forgotten existed. This human wasn't calculating advantage. Wasn't measuring debt. He was just helping. Because someone needed it. Jake leaned on his broom. "You got somewhere to stay tonight?" Veklar's throat worked. "No. Couch is yours if you want it," Jake said. "It's not fancy but it's dry." Veklar ate the pizza like a man who hadn't tasted food in days. But it wasn't the desperate gulping of starvation. Each bite was slow, measured, as if every piece of pepperoni carried the weight of his entire journey to this small barbershop. His claws clicked softly against the cardboard box as he reached for another slice. Jake continued sweeping, the bristles making soft scratching sounds against the tile floor. He'd learned a long time ago that sometimes people needed space more than conversation. Whether they were human or something else entirely didn't seem to matter much. The rain kept falling outside. Inside, the silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that happens when two beings are just existing in the same space, no expectations hanging in the air. My people once ruled 12 star systems, Veklar said suddenly. His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the small shop, it carried like a confession. We were called the Star Lords of the Ember Reaches. Our fleets darkened entire skies. When we arrived at a world, civilizations trembled. Jake kept sweeping but slowed his movements. He was listening. That was a long time ago, Veklar continued. He set down the pizza slice he'd been holding. His hands rested on his knees and Jake could see they were still shaking slightly. Our sun began dying 2 centuries ago. At first our scientists said we had time. Thousands of years, they claimed. They were wrong. The alien's voice carried a weight that Jake recognized. He'd heard it before in his shop. Old veterans talking about wars. Parents who'd lost children. People carrying grief they couldn't set down. Now we scatter across the galaxy like dust caught in stellar winds, Veklar said. We beg for territory. Trade our labor for shelter. Sell our ships piece by piece just to survive. His amber eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. Our empire is gone. Our worlds are dying. But our pride. He touched his chest with one clawed hand. Our pride remains. It is the last thing we have. Jake stopped sweeping and leaned the broom against the wall. He grabbed the chair where customers usually waited and dragged it over, sitting down a few feet from Veklar. Not too close. Just close enough. Must be hard, Jake said. He meant it. He could hear it in every word the alien spoke. The pain of a people who had fallen from greatness and couldn't figure out how to be anything else. Veklar turned his head to look at Jake. Those glowing amber eyes studied him with an intensity that should have been unsettling but somehow wasn't. Do you understand what it cost me to knock on your door? His voice cracked on the last word. What it cost to ask for food. For help? Jake nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I do. Then why? Veklar's voice rose slightly, frustration bleeding through. Why do you help me? The coalition taught us their ways. Every transaction requires exchange. Services rendered must be compensated. Debt must be recorded and balanced. This is how civilized species interact. He gestured at the pizza box at the shop, at Jake himself. Yet you ask nothing. You record no debt. You demand no compensation. Why? The question hung in the air between them like something physical. Jake could feel the alien's confusion, his genuine inability to understand what had just happened. Jake thought about it for a moment. How did you explain something that just felt natural? Something you did without thinking because it was the right thing to do? You needed help, Jake said finally, meeting those amber eyes directly. That's enough. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other across the small space of the barbershop. Rain pattered against the windows. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily. Somewhere down the street, a car drove past, its tires hissing on wet pavement. In that moment, Veklar felt something shift inside his chest. This human wasn't following protocols or calculating advantages. He wasn't measuring the worth of assistance against potential gain. He was just being kind. Simple, uncomplicated, unconditional kindness. The kind that expected nothing in return. Veklar's species had forgotten this. They'd had it once, millennia ago, before they became conquerors. Before power and pride had consumed everything else. But somewhere in their rise to dominance, they'd cut away the softer parts of themselves. They'd called it evolution, optimization, strength. Looking at Jake Riley, sitting in his small barbershop with hair clippings still on the floor, Veklar realized what his people had actually done. They hadn't evolved. They'd lost something precious. Something this human still carried like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jake stood up and walked to the window, checking the rain. It's supposed to storm all night, he said casually, like they were just talking about the weather. Then he turned back to Veklar. You got somewhere to stay tonight? Veklar's throat tightened. His pride screamed at him to lie, to say yes, to walk back out into the rain with whatever dignity he had left. But he was tired. Tired of pride. Tired of pretending. Tired of carrying the weight of an empire that no longer existed. No, he said quietly. Jake shrugged like it was no big deal. Couch is yours if you want it. Upstairs apartment. It's not fancy, but it's warm and dry. Veklar looked down at his hands, scaled, clawed, trembling hands that had once commanded warships. I have no way to repay you. Didn't ask you to, Jake said simply. Veklar left at dawn. Jake gave him a thermos of coffee and directions to the nearest repair station that worked with alien ships. The dragon stood in the doorway, trying to find words that didn't exist in any language he knew. Finally, he just nodded once, deep and formal, and walked out into the gray morning light. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. During the 3-day journey to rejoin his clan ship, the memory played over and over in his mind. The barbershop. The pizza. The way Jake had looked at him, not with pity, not with calculation, but with simple human decency. It gnawed at something inside Veklar that he'd thought was dead. When he finally docked with the clan vessel Ember's memory, he went straight to Elder Korvath. The old dragon was in the meditation chamber as always, staring at holographic projections of their dying homeworld, watching their sun slowly consume itself. Elder, Veklar said, I need to tell you about something that happened. Korvath didn't turn around. You crashed your scout ship. I received the report. What else? I met a human. A barber named Jake Riley. And? Veklar hesitated. How did you explain something that defied everything they'd been taught for the last 500 years? He helped me. He gave me food. Shelter. He asked for nothing in return. Now Korvath turned. His ancient eyes, dimmer than Veklar's but still sharp, studied the younger dragon. You must have misunderstood the exchange. Humans use complex social contracts. Perhaps. There was no contract, Veklar interrupted. Something he'd never done before. No agreement. No debt recorded. He just helped. Because I needed help. The elder's expression didn't change, but Veklar saw something flicker in those old eyes. Disbelief. Or maybe something deeper. Something that hurt to remember. That's not possible, Korvath said flatly. No species operates that way. Not anymore. We did once, Veklar said quietly. Didn't we? Before we became conquerors. Before everything became about power and pride and dominance. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally Korvath spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Tell me everything. Veklar did. He described the moment in detail, the rain, the small shop, the look in Jake's eyes. The way the human had swept the floor to give him privacy. The couch. The coffee in the morning. Every small act of kindness that had somehow added up to something enormous. When he finished, Korvath sat down slowly as if his legs had suddenly become weak. I need to think about this, the elder said. But Veklar couldn't keep it to himself. He told others in the clan. Young dragons mostly who hadn't lived through the glory days of empire. Who'd only known the shame of being refugees in their own galaxy. They listened with a hunger he hadn't expected. Within days the story had spread to other clan ships. Within weeks, it had traveled through the entire Draconic communication network, a web of quantum link transmitters that connected their scattered people across dozens of systems. And everywhere it went, it sparked something. Young dragons started asking questions. Hard questions. Questions their elders didn't want to answer. Why don't we do this anymore? When did we stop caring for each other without demanding payment? When did we forget how to be kind? The elders had no good answers. They talked about survival. About the harsh realities of a dying civilization. About how they couldn't afford weakness or sentimentality. But their words sounded hollow even to themselves. The Mekros picked up the transmissions 3 weeks after Veklar's encounter. They were beings of pure logic, their organic bodies long ago replaced with mechanical precision. They lived for data, for patterns, for understanding the mathematical rules that govern behavior. This story made no sense to them. They sent observers to Earth. 15 units, disguised as various alien species, deployed to human cities across 3 continents. Their mission was simple: document and analyze this anomaly. What they found shocked their central processing networks. In a single day of observation in Denver, they documented 12 instances of humans helping strangers. A woman giving money to someone without a home. A man stopping traffic to help an elderly person cross the street. A teenager returning a lost wallet with all the cash still inside. A restaurant giving free meals to anyone who couldn't pay. In Seattle they counted 14 more instances. In Boston 26. No contracts signed. No debts recorded. No expectation of payment or return favors. Just humans being kind to other humans. And sometimes to aliens too. Just because. The Mekros sent their data back to their homeworld. The analysis took 47 hours of processing time across their entire computational network. The conclusion was simple but devastating to their worldview. Human behavior pattern defies logical optimization. Continued study required. The Traders Guild heard about it next. They were the economic backbone of the coalition, species who'd turned commerce into an art form. Everything had value. Everything could be bought, sold, or traded. That was the law of civilized society. They convened an emergency session on their massive trade station orbiting Vega Prime. Representatives from 43 member species gathered in the Great Hall, their concern palpable. Guild Chairman Vexilla, a being that looked like a walking collection of tentacles wrapped around a brain, addressed the assembly. "This behavior makes no economic sense," he declared, his voice translator making his words sound clipped and worried. "Humans are giving away resources, food, shelter, time, money, with no return on investment. No interest accrued. No equity gained." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was heresy against everything they believed. "But that's not the worst part," Vexilla continued. "It's spreading. Some of our own youth are imitating it. We've had reports of young traders forgiving debts, offering assistance without contracts. They call it walking the human path." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. The foundation of galactic civilization was cracking, and it all traced back to a barbershop in Seattle where a man had shared his leftover pizza with a stranger. 6 months passed. Jake's life went back to normal, mostly. He cut hair, swept floors, listened to his customers talk about their lives. He thought about Veklar sometimes, wondered if the dragon had made it home safely. But mostly he just kept running his shop the way he always had. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The bell above the door chimed, and Jake looked up from trimming old Mr. Henderson's hair. The customer who walked in wasn't human. She stood about 6 feet tall, with 4 arms and a body covered in what looked like purple chitinous plates. Her face was insectoid, compound eyes that shimmered like oil on water, mandibles that clicked softly when she moved. "Are you Jake Riley?" Her voice came from a translator device on her chest, giving her words a slightly mechanical tone. "That's me," Jake said, his scissors still poised mid-cut. "You need a haircut?" Mr. Henderson snorted with laughter. "No," the alien said. She moved further into the shop with careful, deliberate steps. "My name is Ambassador Kess. I'm with the Coalition Council. I need to speak with you about something important." Jake glanced at Mr. Henderson in the mirror. The old man raised his eyebrows but said nothing. "Can it wait? I'm kind of in the middle of something here." "I can wait," Kess said. She folded herself into one of the waiting chairs, all 4 arms resting neatly in her lap. Jake finished the haircut, his mind racing. A coalition ambassador. In his shop. This couldn't be good. Maybe he'd broken some law he didn't know about. Maybe Veklar had gotten in trouble. Maybe. "All done, Mr. Henderson," Jake said, brushing loose hair off the old man's shoulders. Mr. Henderson stood up, studying the ambassador with open curiosity. "You here to cause trouble for Jake?" "No trouble," Kess said. "Quite the opposite, actually." The old man paid, left a generous tip like always and headed for the door. He paused on his way out. "Whatever this is about, Jake, you didn't do nothing wrong. Remember that." After he left, Jake turned to face the ambassador. "So what's this about?" Kess stood and activated something on her wrist device. A holographic display materialized in the air between them, showing what looked like star charts, population data, and dozens of alien symbols Jake couldn't read. "Mr. Riley," Kess began, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully, "you may not realize what you've started." Jake stared at the hologram, completely lost. "Started what?" 17 draconic clans have sent their children to Earth, Kess said, manipulating the display with 2 of her hands. Images appeared, young dragons walking through human cities, sitting in human schools, working alongside humans in various jobs. Not for trade agreements. Not for diplomatic treaties. Not for anything we've ever documented before. They're here to learn. "Learn what?" Jake asked. "What you showed Veklar," Kess said simply. She pulled up another image, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was a picture of his barbershop. His actual shop taken from outside. They call it walking the Riley path. The younger generation has adopted it as something between a pilgrimage and an education. Jake felt his face getting hot. "I don't understand. He was hungry. I had food." "Exactly," Kess said. The word hung in the air like she'd just revealed the secret to the universe. "You gave him pizza." "Yeah. And you asked for nothing in return." "He didn't have anything to give," Jake said, feeling defensive now. "What was I supposed to do, let him starve?" Kessa's compound eyes seemed to study him with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. Then something remarkable happened. The ambassador smiled. It was a strange expression on her insectoid features. Mandibles spreading slightly, a soft chittering sound that the translator rendered as gentle laughter. In a galaxy where every civilization optimized for survival, efficiency, and power, Kess said slowly, humanity kept something the rest of us lost. You give without calculating return. You help because someone needs help. You share because you have something to share. She manipulated the hologram again, and now Jake saw data streams, thousands of them. The Mechros have documented over 3,000 instances of spontaneous human generosity in the past 6 months. No contracts. No debt systems. No expectation of repayment. It's statistically improbable. Evolutionarily questionable. She paused. And apparently, revolutionary. Jake sat down heavily in his barber chair. You're telling me that giving someone pizza started a revolution? Not just any revolution, Kess said. A revolution of thought. Of remembering. Other species are taking notice, Mr. Riley. The young ones especially. They're asking questions their elders can't answer. They're wondering why they've spent millennia building civilizations based on transaction and debt when there's another way. The bell chimed again and Mr. Henderson poked his head back in. Forgot my hat, he said, grabbing it from the coat rack. He looked at Jake and grinned. Kid's been like that since high school, you know. Always helping folks. One time in 10th grade, he gave Tommy Watson his own lunch for a whole week because Tommy's dad lost his job. Jake groaned. Mr. Henderson. It's true, the old man insisted. And there was that time he spent his whole summer helping rebuild Mrs. Chen's fence after the storm. Didn't ask for a dime. Mrs. Chen made me cookies, Jake protested. Because she wanted to, Mr. Henderson said. Not because you asked. He looked at the ambassador. Whatever you're here about, just know that Jake Riley is good people. Always has been. After he left again, Kess looked at Jake with something that might have been wonder in her alien eyes. Your species hasn't optimized it away, she said softly. The rest of us cut out empathy because it wasn't efficient. We removed compassion because it didn't maximize survival. But humans. She gestured at the door where Mr. Henderson had been. You kept it. Despite your wars, your conflicts, your near extinctions. You kept the fire burning. Jake didn't know what to say to that. So he said the only thing that made sense to him. Somebody's got to. 1 year later, Jake was preparing for the holidays. He'd hung some simple decorations in the shop. White lights around the windows, a small tree in the corner. Nothing fancy. Outside, the first real cold snap of winter had hit Seattle, and everyone was bundling up in coats and scarves. He was restocking his supplies when he heard it. A sound like thunder but rhythmic. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Multiple sets. The door opened and Veklar stepped inside. But he wasn't alone. 20 young dragons followed him through the doorway, one after another, their scales gleaming under the shop lights. Blues, greens, deep purples and burnished golds. They were smaller than Veklar, younger, their eyes bright with curiosity. They crowded into the small barber shop until there was barely room to breathe. Jake Riley, Veklar's voice boomed through the space and Jake saw that the dragon's eyes were brighter than before. Healthier. You must understand what you've done. Jake looked around at the sea of scaled faces staring at him with something close to reverence. His first instinct was to make a joke, but something in Veklar's tone stopped him. This was important. Really important. I really don't, man, Jake said honestly. He moved to his small coffee maker in the back. Anyone want coffee? I don't know if you guys drink coffee, but I've got water too. That would be appreciated, Veklar said. Jake started brewing a full pot and pulling out every cup he had. Some of the younger dragons took the cups with obvious reverence, like he was handing them something sacred instead of just cheap diner-style coffee. Veklar waited until everyone was settled. Some sitting on the floor, others standing, a few perched on chairs that creaked under their weight. Then he moved forward and did something Jake never expected. The massive dragon knelt down, bringing his head level with Jake's. The galaxy is ancient, Veklar began, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the shop. Older than your species can imagine. Millions of years of civilizations rising and falling. Species evolving, optimizing, specializing for survival. Jake nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. Somewhere in those millions of years, Veklar continued, we all made the same choice. We cut away the inefficient parts of ourselves. Compassion without profit, gone. Generosity without contracts, eliminated. Mercy without advantage, bred out of our genes. His amber eyes locked onto Jake's. We called it evolution. Progress. Maturity. One of the younger dragons spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. Humans still have those things. You keep the fire burning when everyone else let theirs go out. The bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Palmer walked in for her weekly appointment. She froze when she saw the crowd of dragons, her hands still on the doorknob. Oh my, she said. Jake stood up. Hey Mrs. Palmer. I'm running a bit behind as you can see. You mind waiting a few minutes? Take your time, honey, she said, settling into a chair by the window. She seemed surprisingly calm about the dragons. But then again she'd lived through 3 wars and raised 5 kids. Not much rattled her. Another human customer arrived. A college kid named Tommy who came in every month for a trim. He squeezed through the door, looked around at the dragons and just shrugged. This about that Veklar thing? He asked Jake. Yeah, I think so, Jake said. Tommy nodded and leaned against the wall, pulling out his phone. Cool. I'll wait. Veklar smiled at the easy acceptance, then continued. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times. Mrs. Palmer spoke up from her chair, not looking up from the magazine she'd picked up. Nuclear weapons. Climate change. Pandemics. Wars that nearly wiped us out. She turned a page calmly. Maybe that's why we remember what matters. We know what happens when you lose your humanity. We've seen it. The younger dragons looked at each other, then back at the humans in the room. There was something in their expressions, a dawning understanding. Veklar nodded slowly, respectfully toward Mrs. Palmer. Yes. You walked to the edge of extinction and chose to step back. Many times. He turned back to Jake. My people wrote poetry about this once, long ago, before we became conquerors. Before our pride consumed everything else. We called it Kale. What's that mean? Tommy asked, actually interested now. The hearth that refuses to die, Veklar translated. The fire at the center of home that keeps burning through the longest winter. That warms travelers. That asks nothing but gives everything. His voice grew thick with emotion. We thought we'd extinguished it. Thought it was a relic of our primitive past. Then I met a barber who shared his dinner with a stranger in the rain. Jake felt his face getting hot. All these eyes on him, all this attention, made him deeply uncomfortable. It was just pizza, guys. Leftover pizza. It was everything, Veklar said softly. He reached out with one massive clawed hand and gently touched Jake's shoulder. It was everything we forgot how to be. Everything the galaxy lost in its march toward efficiency and power. One of the younger dragons stepped forward. We've been studying Earth for 6 months now. Watching humans. Learning from them. We've seen acts of kindness that our databases said were impossible. People helping enemies. Strangers sacrificing for strangers. Communities coming together with no promise of reward. That's just what you do, Mrs. Palmer said matter-of-factly. That's being human. That's being alive, Veklar corrected gently. Real alive. Not just surviving. Not just optimizing. Actually living. He looked around at his young students. These children are the first generation of my people in 500 years to learn this. Because of you, Jake Riley. Because you shared your food with someone who had nothing to offer in return. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft white flakes drifting past the window, coating the street in silence. Jake watched it for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Look, he finally said, I'm just a barber. I cut hair. I'm not special. Any other human would have done the same thing. Exactly, Veklar said, and his voice carried weight that shook the windows. That's why it matters. That's why the galaxy is changing. Tommy looked up from his phone. Wait, the galaxy is changing because of Jake? Veklar stood to his full height, his head nearly touching the ceiling. The galaxy is remembering, he said. Remembering what it means to be more than efficient. More than powerful. More than optimized. He gestured to the young dragons around him. These children will carry that memory back to our worlds. Others are learning too. The fire is spreading. Outside, the snow fell heavier now, covering everything in white. A world that had accidentally taught the stars how to be kind again. And inside a small barber shop, a barber, some dragons, and a few humans who'd stopped by for haircuts stood together in the warm light, sharing coffee and remembering what it meant to be alive.